pupil phaco. So surgeons are left with their surgical skills and experience to choose from the available devices. Today, I'm going to share my approach to small pupil phacoemulsification. As surgeons, we know that a stable mydriasis is an important factor for phacoemulsification. What happens when a pupil size comes down by around a 2.5 millimeter? This translates into a 60 to 65% decrease in the operative field. So not able to see is going to lead us to have several surgical challenges. One thing, this red reflex is lost. So a contrast for doing rhexis and visualizing the anterior cortical leaflet during irrigation and aspiration is lost. Another thing, many surgeons use their pupillary diameter to guide their rhexis, which should not be done because the pupillary diameter can vary with fluctuation in the anterior chamber. And in a small pupil, the rhexis size tends to become small. Making a small rhexis is itself a surgical challenge because the anterior lens capsule can get damaged during your phacoemulsification with your probe or your second instrument. And during nucleofractus within the small rhexis can cause extra stress on the zonules, leading to iatrogenic zonular dialysis. There may be difficulty in cortical aspiration and aligning a toric IOL. Since the plane of emulsification has become a little bit anterior, the corneal endothelium can be compromised if adequate care is not taken. Since the iris and the pupillary margin comes closer to the central safe zone of phacoemulsification, it can get damaged, leading to iris chafing transillumination effect, which translates into poor night vision disturbance and decreased patient satisfaction. The surgery itself becomes prolonged, and increased iris tissue handling can cause increased postoperative inflammation and chance for cystoid macular edema. So there is a downward spiraling sequence of events which can be associated, and name any complication we have heard of in cataract surgery we can anticipate if we are not prepared to handle it. The etiology of small pupil, it can be a poorly dilating pupil itself, which could be due to aging, or associated factors like pseudoexfoliation, diabetes, complicated cataract, or prolonged use of topical myotics. Or the pupil can start itself with normally and constricts during surgery, which we call it as intraoperative miosis. A special mention on IFS, which was first described by David Chang and John Campbell. It is associated with a triad of, first thing is a billowing, which is nothing but the iris flutters with even mild fluidic current in the AC, which can be noticed after making a side port if you're going to inject a BSS or a lignocaine. Then at that time itself, we can notice this billowing. This is the first subtle sign of IFS. If this is not noticed and due precautions is not taken care, it can progress to iris prolapse, which can occur through the corneal main wound or through the side port, which is a moderate IFS, or it can lead to a progressive intraop miosis, which is a severe IFS. What is the basic pathophysiology? The IFS is, the incidence is noted to be 1 to 12%, but among the patients who are taking alpha adrenergic antagonists for BPH, the incidence varies between 30 to 80%. Tamsulosin is a selective alpha-1A receptor blocker, and this alpha-1A receptor is present in the bladder neck smooth muscles and the dilator smooth muscles. So what it does, it causes a irreversible blockade, and this is the smooth muscles in the normal control subject, whereas this is the smooth muscle thickness of a subject who is on tamsulosin for BPH. You can notice that it causes a permanent iris atrophy. So the severity of this IFS is dependent on the damage caused to the so the more severe iris atrophy, we can expect a more severe grade of IFS. Apart from this alpha-1 adrenergic receptor antagonist, which is a known risk factor, there are other things, which is the gender. The males are more predisposed. It has to be kept in mind that females are also treated for urinary outlet obstruction with tamsulosin. Age, increasing age predisposes the patient to cataract and also BPH, and vice versa. So the more the patient, more than 60 years, there is high chance that the patient is being treated with BPH and more risk of IFS. Hypertension, antihypertensive drugs, and antipsychotics and benzodiazepines or other drugs to worth mentioning. And decreased pupillary diameter itself is a risk factor. A pupil less than 6 millimeter is an independent risk factor for development of IFS. So what are the things we can do preoperatively? A detailed history taking of the patient, the drugs which the patient is taking currently, and also a past history. Even the patient has been exposed taking this drug for a few days or few weeks, and it can cause an irreversible blockade and cause a permanent iris atrophy. So even past history of this drug usage is really important to be noted. And in slit lamp examination, note always document the maximum pupillary diameter, what the pupil can dilate with the topical mydriatics, and look for the associated signs like pseudoexfoliation, or if it is a complicated cataract where the posterior synecdoche or pupillary membrane is present. This picture is a senile myotic pupil. The most important thing is the examination of the other eye. If the patient has been operated, look for any signs of iris damage like chaffing or a transillumination defect. Or if the patient has been operated in your own center, you can just go through the notes of any floppy iris or the iris changes that happen during the surgery. So one question which we all like to know is, does stopping Flomax help in IFS? Since I've already mentioned that it causes an irreversible blockade and induce a permanent iris atrophy, there is no strong evidence in the literature that says that withdrawal can help. So it is of unpredictable and questionable value, and I don't usually recommend it. So what are the things we can do preoperatively? We all give topical NSAIDs before surgery, which facilitates and prevents intraoperative meiosis that can be carried on. And atropine has been studied as 1% eye drops 3 times daily, 1 to 2 days prior to surgery. What atropine does is it blocks the sphincter pupillae. So it helps to counteract the progressive meiosis which happens during surgery. Even in tamsulosin study group, the patients who have been treated with atropine, 50% of them needed some other form of intervention for IFS. So the role of atropine has been limited only to mild IFS, and it is insufficient for moderate to severe IFS. Another thing which has to be kept in mind is acute urinary retention can happen if the patient is put on atropine with BPH untreated. So when you start surgery, you must differentiate between these two entities, a rigid pupil versus an elastic pupil. What is this rigid pupil? It is due to a fibrosis of the pupillary sphincter pupillae. So this pupil, when you inject Visco or BSS, the size doesn't vary and the size remains the same with viscoelastic. So this is a rigid pupil. In case if you want to use any pupillary expansion ring, this pupil has to be stretched, a stretched pupilloplasty, which causes a microsphincter tears and breaks this fibrosis so that the pupillary expansion rings can be inserted. If you're going to use iris hooks, you can use it in this pupil. And what is an elastic pupil? The elastic pupil is mainly a pupil of IFS where the iris dilator muscle has lost its tone. So this can be identified as early as when you make a paracentesis, when you inject a BSS or intracameral lidocaine, you can notice the pupillary billowing. And this pupil dilates momentarily with viscoelastic injection and comes back to normal size. So any patient on BPH, or if the other eye has signs of intraoperative floppy iris or shallow AC, hypermetropes or post-EACPA status, these are the high-risk eyes that can develop IFS. So a special note has to be mentioned on the iris behavior as soon as you make your paracentesis. And while making the clear corneal incision, we can make it little bit slightly longer, not err on the shorter side. What it does is it keeps the iris away from the inner lip of the incision and hence reduces the likelihood of iris prolapse, though it does not prevent 100%. So this is the clear corneal incision, which is slightly made anteriorly so that it keeps the iris away from the inner lip of the incision. If you can see any visible cause like posterior synecdoche or a pupillary membrane, that can be dealt with. This is a complicated cataract where the patient has posterior synecdoche. So after injecting a viscoelastic, a cyclodialysis spatula can be used to sweep out all the synecdoche. Sometimes the synecdoche can be restricted only to the pupillary margin, or it can be a broad-based synecdoche. Care should be taken to remove it. The pupillary membrane, if present, can be cut with the scissors, micro scissors, and peeled off with a forceps. After peeling off a pupillary membrane, we can expect a little bit of a iris bleeders, which could be tamponade using an air or viscoelastic. So since this pupil is just having a posterior synecdoche, though the pupil diameter is small, we can be able to do a safe phacoemulsification without any adjuvant device or any other medications. A stop and chop is being performed after nuclear emulsification, irrigation aspiration, and IOL is placed in the bag. A stretch pupilloplasty. The stretch pupilloplasty is usually done using a two Coughlin hook taken through these two paracenteses made opposite to each other. The pupillary margin is engaged with the Coughlin hook and stretched slowly, and this is maintained for 5 to 10 seconds. Once this is carried out in one direction, the same can be repeated in a direction perpendicular to the first one. What this causes? This causes a microsphincter tears at the pupillary margin, and this is supposed to work well in a rigid pupil. I just recorded this video in a patient whose other eye had an IFS changes just to demonstrate that this is really ineffective in a patient of IFS. You can see even after stretch pupilloplasty, the pupil size will come down drastically. After injecting a viscoelastic, though the pupil appears to dilate momentarily, the size comes down gradually. So this is really ineffective in an elastic pupil. Sphincterotomies, we all know that the sphincter pupillae is lying around 1.5 to 2 millimeter. A small incision can be made. It can be either 4 or 6, but I don't usually advise this in phacoemulsification. So in IFS, sphincterotomies and stretch pupilloplasty is ineffective and is going to make the situation worse. So this is a case of small pupil in a patient without a known history of IFS. The other eye is cataractous, and there was no billowing of pupil on injection of lignocaine initially. So the pupil size was around 5 millimeter. It is a moderate dilatation. So I went ahead and doing a rhexis just at the pupillary margin. So making an adequate sized rhexis is critical, after which hydrodissection is being performed. I perform a stop and chop technique. Even though the pupil is 5 millimeter, this cataract is around NS 1 to 2 grade. It is a really soft cataract. So keeping your trench length limited to the pupillary margin, but of adequate depth is really important. If you could do an adequate depth of trench, even this short trench length, that's 5 millimeter, can crack easily. So after making it, you can crack and have two heminucleus. If you are the one who are used to do divide and conquer, even the heminucleus, you can make a small trench and crack it, or subchop into small fragments and then emulsify it. I didn't alter my phaco setting since the pupil was behaving normally and there is no iris tissue billowing and the pupillary size remains stationary. It is not that you have to make it to two pieces. You can even subchop it since the plane of emulsification is going to be little anterior. So subchop into small fragments and then emulsify, and take care to inject viscoelastic whenever needed so that the endothelium is being taken care of. The pupil remains stable throughout the procedure. And I always prefer bimamal irrigation and aspiration because the irrigation port can be used to move the pupillary margin and visualize the anterior cortical leaflet and aspirate it. If you're used to coaxial irrigation and aspiration, you can use a second instrument like a Sinskey hook or a Coughlin hook to retract the pupillary margin for irrigation and aspiration. And ensure always in the bag IOL implantation, confirm it that the haptics lie within the rhexis margin. And the case is complete. This case is, the pupil was relatively good to start with. It was around 6.5 and it dilated well with viscoelastic. My go-to choice of viscoelastic is always HPMC in all cases, except in case where I want to protect the corneal endothelium, I go with a more protective dispersive viscoelastic, or in intumescent cataract, a cohesive viscoelastic. A direct chop is being performed. I didn't notice any difficulty till this. So when I was emulsifying the heminucleus, you can see the billowing of the pupil here. I'll just repeat this again. You can see the iris fluttering and the pupil size was really coming down, and you can see the little bit of ovalization of the pupil here, so that the iris is tending to come out through the second side port. So you can see the fluttering of pupil here. Though I reduced my parameters here, the pupil size kept on coming down. So after removing an heminucleus, I just rotated and went ahead with chopping the second heminucleus and removing it. Scientifically speaking, HPMC, the Hyalon 5 works well for IFS because it is a visco-adaptive. What I mean by visco-adaptive is that at low flow settings, which is preferred in case of IFS, it maintains a space well and pushes the iris posteriorly. Whereas in high flow settings, when you are doing an IA, it behaves like dispersive and comes out easily. So Hyalon 5 is the viscoelastic of choice for IFS, but I managed this case with HPMC alone. The pupil size has really come down to around 2.5 millimeter during IA, but I could successfully complete the case with a little bit of change in my phaco settings. So viscomydriasis has been advocated, but it helps to hold back the iris, but the effect will not last throughout the phacoemulsification. Iris hooks, it is available as 4,0 polypropylene or 6,0 nylon. This nylon is disposable one. This 4,0 polypropylene is reusable and it is autoclavable. The thickness is of around 0.15 millimeter, the thickness of a haptic of a 3-piece IOL. It is not costly to purchase, and it works well across the range of severity of the IFS and the surgeon's experience, regardless of how small the pupil is. Previously, we were using this square-shaped configuration, but we all know the disadvantage of the square-shaped configuration is we have a wide platform of iris on the way of the phaco probe. So each time you take your phaco probe in, you can have this iris coming on the way of the probe. So this square configuration is given away, and Thomas Otting has proposed this diamond configuration. What happens here is the fourth hook is placed sub-incisionally. What I mean sub-incisionally is you make your phaco incision, another incision for this insertion of iris is just posterior. You make it a little bit limbal. Either you can make it beneath the clear corneal incision or adjacent to the clear corneal incision. So this keeps your iris away from the path of the phaco probe. But what I prefer is to use 5 hooks, 2 on either side of my phaco incision, so that it keeps the iris away from the path of phaco probe. So talking about the incision, you have to make always a limbal incision so that the iris, when you pull, it is not going to tend anteriorly. So make a limbal incision, a stab incision. It need not be larger like even your side port. So after making 5 incision, I'm just inserting the iris hooks. When inserting the iris hooks, care should be taken not to overinflate the anterior chamber with viscoelastic. What happens if you're going to overinflate the anterior chamber? The iris is going to push away against the anterior lens capsule. So keep the anterior little bit underfilled with viscoelastic, and always you can inject viscoelastic little bit under the pupillary margin so that it helps to engage the hooks easily. So after taking the iris hooks, engage each of the hooks and put the stopper. Here, I'm not going to pull my iris hooks till the end. I'm just going to engage and leave it. Subsequently, all the hooks are placed. I'm not tightening it. I'm just engaging the pupillary margin. I'm just leaving it. So once I'm engaging, what I used to do is I don't pull each hook fully. I just enlarge it subsequently, little by little, so that I'm not going to cause a large unintentional large sphincter tears, which is going to lead to a pupillary abnormalities later on. So titrate and enlarge your hooks little by little subsequently to the desired diameter. It is not that you have to anchor your this hooks till your paracentesis. It is not like that. Once the desired pupillary dilatation is achieved, you can carry away with your phacoemulsification. Using this, 5 hooks gives a rhomboid configuration. And once it is done, loosen the stopper and then manipulate to remove your iris hooks and bring it out of the eye. So using hooks in IFS, it enlarges and maintains the pupillary size, and it also gives sufficient tension to the iris stroma, so the iris is kept away from the zone of phacoemulsification. The disadvantage which has been talked about the iris hooks are additional incision. Yeah, it is needed, and the iris sphincter damage. In an elastic pupil, this incidence of sphincter damage is really less. When you're going to use it in a rigid pupil where there is fibrosis of the pupil, you can get microsphincter tears. And making a stab incision little bit at the limbal level, not a clear corneal, it is not going to bring up the iris anteriorly. And this is a case where the patient is on tamsulosin medication. So the pupil was relatively around 5 to 5 millimeter in diameter. So I went ahead without any pupillary expansion device. And you can notice the billowing of the pupil on injecting BSS. I injected visco, the pupillary size maintained the same. So I did the rhexis up to the pupillary diameter. Once the rhexis is done, always remember that hydrodissection is the first inciting step for any iris prolapse. So care should be taken that you do a gentle multi-quadrant hydrodissection. Always decompress and then rotate. So I decided to go, this was a relatively soft cataract NS1 with PSCC. I decided to go with stop and chop technique. Once I was making an initial trench, I can see my iris coming towards the side port. So by the time I managed with and little viscoelastic is injected, the pupil became so myosed. So now I have no other option rather than intervening here. The pupil is really small, so using any pupillary expansion ring is difficult here. So I went ahead and using iris hooks. But this situation is totally different because now I have two margins. One is the pupillary margin and second is the iris margin. Anterior rhexis margin. So care should be taken not to engage the rhexis margin with the hooks. So what can be done is a little bit of viscoelastic, as I said, can be injected under the pupillary margin so that the pupil comes up. But care should be taken not to overinflate, because if I'm going to overinflate, already this eye is more prone for iris prolapse, so it can prolapse. So a little bit of visco can be injected so that the pupillary margin comes up. And while taking in the iris hook, always keep it parallel to the iris and slightly tilt only at the level of the pupillary margin. So you're going to catch only the pupillary margin. And even if I have catched my rhexis margin accidentally, I'm not going to pull and enlarge this till the limbus. So I just make sure I enlarge the pupil till the sufficient size which I need, so that I'm not going to tear the rhexis margin if I have accidentally caught it. So I did not overpull the hooks. I just kept it at this diameter and went ahead with phacoemulsification. Since already I had a heminucleus, my work was to just subchop it and emulsify. Since the iris tissue is very close, pupillary margin is very close to the high fluidic currents, always bring down your phaco parameters by 20 to 25% of the normal what you're using. So this is called as the low flow phaco. And since the iris is very close to the phaco probe, there is chance that you can accidentally damage the iris. If you accidentally activate ultrasound on the iris tissue, it can lead to iris chafing. What happens after iris chafing? You can get this tissue fibrils, which has a tendency to come to your phaco probe or the IA probe again and again. So care should be taken not to damage your pupillary margin or iris at any time. The subsequent steps of IA and IOL implantation becomes easy with the hooks in place. And now the hooks are removed. So though this patient had a severe IFS, with a timely intervention, there was not much damage to the iris except for a little bit of transillumination defect here. The pupil size also remained normal, even though I used iris hooks, there is no sphincter tears, and the phacoemulsification is carried out without any complication. The other rings which are commonly used is the Malugin ring, which works by this paperclip mechanism. So this is the classic Malugin ring, which was first introduced. It is made up of 40 polypropylene. This is the version 2.0, where it is made up of 50 polypropylene. So it has a thin profile when compared to this classic ring. This thin profile extrapolates into the increased scroll depth, this is a space which is used to catch the iris. And it gives 8-point fixation and gives a good pupillary diameter. The other ring is the Indian-made BHEX ring by Dr. Suvain Bhattacharjee. And the advantage of this ring is it's very thin, 75 micron thickness, like compared to a normal human hair. So it is, when you compare this, Malugin ring is biplanar structure, whereas this is uniplanar and it is very thin. And this is going to occupy, BX ring is going to occupy very less space in the anterior chamber. Whereas this bulky Malugin ring, when you place, this scrolls come at around mid-peripheral iris. So in a shallow anterior chamber, the mid-periphery and the periphery is the part which is going to be more shallow than the central. So this is going to occupy more space in the anterior chamber. The disadvantage of these is both BX and Malugin ring cannot be inserted if the pupil is really small, less than 3 millimeter or in shallow AC. So the pupil has to be stretched by stretch pupilloplasty. It has to be enlarged a little bit, and then we have to insert these two. So the choice of pupil expander device and the OVD, it is left to us. We have multiple variety of rings and hooks, and as a surgeon, we can choose what we want. In my experience, I use pupillary expansion device only when the pupil comes below 3 to 3.5, where inserting a pupil expansion ring is really difficult. So my go-to choice is iris hooks, which works well for me and gives good postoperative outcomes. And this is another case of small pupil where the patient has been planned for toric IOL implantation. The initial phaco parameters, everything is same, and the bimanual IA is being done with the help of irrigation, which is used to retract the iris pupil. I just want to show the implantation of the IOL. So once the IOL is implanted, the viscoelastic is being washed. Even I've removed below the IOL. And you can see this is the mark of the toric IOL where it has to be implanted. So the 3 dots are here. So with the irrigation on through one side port and using a dialer in another, I just rotate it so that it comes to this mark. So you can see these 3 rings are aligned a little bit here. I'm just again rotating again. So even if the pupil comes down during the subsequent part of the surgery, later part of the surgery where you're implanting even a toric IOL, by doing this technique, see, I've just retracted. This is the toric IOL marks, which has to be implanted, and you can see the 3 dots here. So almost the IOL is aligned. I'm checking the other side also. And after confirming it, here is a mark and it is aligned. So after confirming it, even with the irrigation on, and hydrate all the side ports and the main incision, and then take my irrigation off so that the AC doesn't collapse. And this is another case of small pupil. Here I just want to highlight the fact that even during visco wash, since we are going to subchop the fragments and remove, see there is a small hidden epinuclear fragment which was hid behind the iris. So when you're going to subchop and remove the nuclear fragments, there is high chance it can go and hide behind the pupillary margin. So it always, during viscoelastic, take enough care to remove all the viscoelastics and also any epinuclear fragments that is remaining. Having dealt about meiosis, which is one part of IFS, we come to the next part, which is the iris prolapse. The iris prolapse can make a cataract surgery more frustrating, and many of us think that iris prolapse is more synonymous with IFS, but it is not so. It could be one of the 3 things. It could be due to a leaky or poorly constructed wound, IFS being the second most, it is the most common cause of iris prolapse. The third other thing which is often poorly understood is pressure gradient. What I mean by pressure gradient is there is a high pressure behind the iris, which is the posterior chamber, and low pressure in front of the iris. So the iris always tends to move from a high pressure to the low pressure area. When this can happen during aggressive hydrodissection, where the fluid collects within the capsular bag. Another entity is fluid misdirection, where the BSS can seep in through a zonular defect or through a columbobatous eye and hydrate the vitreous, and other causes of severe positive pressure, like a tight speculum, excessive retrobulbar anesthesia, or a suprachoroidal hemorrhage per se. So if it is due to a poor wound construction, suture and plan a new incision, that has to be done. And management of IFS, we have seen in detail. All these things work in conjunction. It is not that we have left with one option. Atropine works in mild IFS. You can use intracameral preservative-free epinephrine. Helon 5 works in mild to moderate case, but hooks and pupillary expanders works 100% best most of the time. Along with the surgically modifications, what has been said, like placing your incision little bit anterior, low flow phacoemulsification, all these things have to be taken care in managing IFS. This is a case where hydrodissection is being attempted. The rexis size is slightly smaller. There is no burping out of viscoelastic. And after even a single wave, you can see that iris is coming out. And you can see the distension of the capsular bag. So unless this intracapsular fluid is let out, this iris is not going to go inside. We have to decompress the nucleus, let out the intracapsular fluid, and then reposit the iris. So what is this? This was the initial picture where the rhexis was small with a deep AC. This was before hydrodissection. So immediately after hydrodissection, what has happened? Shallowing of AC, you can see the widening of capsular rhexis. This is because of the anterior movement of the lens, and this is typical capsular block syndrome. What happens if you're not going to decompress the nucleus and keep on injecting irrigation fluid? If it is a large rhexis and it's a soft cataract, the nucleus is going to prolapse out of the bag. But if you're not going to decompress and then repeat hydrodissection, if your rhexis is going to be small or if it is a hard cataract, you can have a capsular blowout and your nucleus can drop. So the ideal way to do hydrodissection is always burp out the viscoelastic and create a fluid track for the fluid to escape. So I like to keep my anterior chamber a little bit shallow, tent up the rhexis margin and look for the wave. Once you see the wave, decompress and repeat the hydrodissection. Always prefer to do a multi-quadrant hydrodissection. So repeat it in another quadrant and decompress. And this is hydrodelineation being done. So with iris prolapse, as surgeons, we have time to think what is the cause. So always check the pressure of the eye. If you feel it is hard, it can be due to too much of viscoelastic trapped behind your iris. So decompress through side port, release the visco, and if the eye becomes soft, little bit soft, reposit the iris. Now your iris will get reposited. If you feel even after decompression, the eye is remaining firm, then you have to think something from the posterior segment, which is the cause of iris prolapse. And the immediate thing what we all do is, if we get an iris prolapse, we tend to push through the main incision. This should not be done because this causes, one, first of all, it is not going to solve the problem. Second, by pushing like this, we are going to damage all the posterior iris pigment epithelium. So postoperatively, this will create a lot of transillumination defects and night vision problems. So rather what we have to do, we have to decompress the anterior chamber. So through a side port, decompress and let the visco out and then reposit the iris. But this reposition could have been done always through the side port. It's better. So once the visco comes out, the iris gets reposited easily. Another thing which I wanted to highlight is, like, once the iris comes out during the initial steps, it has always a tendency to come repeatedly prolapse. So why? Because the iris tends to follow the fluidic current. So when this is a case where the surgeon has experienced iris prolapse initially and closely observe the foot pedal position. So this is foot pedal position 1. So when the surgeon is coming out of the eye in 1, I just load the video just for you to watch. So the iris also comes to the incision. So this should not be done. And to reposit the iris, the surgeon is injecting more and more of visco. This is not going to solve the problem. So with more of visco, the iris again tends to come through the main incision. So what can be done? So this is a case where the pupil was relatively good to start with. During hydrodissection, I could see that the iris was like a little bit ovalizing, as a tendency of little bit to prolapse. So by that time, I did half the heminucleus, the iris was totally out. So what can be done? You can take a second instrument, preferably a cyclodialysis spatula, reposit the iris. And if you feel that iris has a tendency to come out, you can keep the spatula there. And again, I want to observe you. So while going inside the eye, I am in foot pedal position 0. So I'm not in 1. I'm not pushing the fluid again. So gently in 0, I just go inside the eye and then 1. So once inside the eye, make sure that you're away from the pupillary margin. Then I exchange my spatula with my second instrument, a chopper, complete my phacoemulsification. In such cases, always try to do phacoemulsification in one go, because coming out of the eye again and again, it's going to be more traumatic to the iris. So after having removed one heminucleus, if you notice clearly, just watch the foot pedal position. Immediately before coming out, I switch to 0. My foot pedal position is 0. See here, it is 0. So the iris does not come out. So this is important thing which we can keep in mind, so that whenever we take the probe and in and out, in an eye where iris has already prolapsed, we can avoid damaging the iris and prevent more iris prolapse. And coming to the wound closure, this is again, when you come in one, you have the iris, always it comes in with the fluidic current. So what I advise is, like, after you reposit the iris, always hydrate your wound first rather than refilling the anterior chamber. And this can be done keeping your second instrument tangential, not directed inside. So keep it tangential, create a stromal hydration, and then slowly refill the anterior chamber so that the anterior chamber form. Here the tunnel was not good. It was really large, relatively large incision. So I just wanted to close it. So I put an additional suture. So never hesitate to close your tunnel if the wound is not properly constructed. So always hydrate, do a stromal hydration, and then inject little bit of a saline slowly so that your anterior chamber reforms. Post-operatively, since there is lot of iris manipulation and prolonged surgery, intensive steroids and NSAID, and closely follow up the patient for cystoid macular edema. So tips to prevent iris prolapse: create slightly longer wound, avoid overfilling the anterior chamber with viscoelastic, remove viscoelastic before hydrodissection. Whenever you get an iris prolapse, first decompress the anterior chamber and then reposit through the side port. Lower the intraocular pressure, bottle height, and do a low flow phacoemulsification. And don't hesitate to use a support device, either a high-risk hooks or rings when needed. So this is just to illustrate what I will be planning in such cases. So always history of Flomax, even in your pre-op surgery checklist, this should be an important thing. Patients on BPH, this treatment history, present and past, should be elicited, and look into the behavior of the other eye, and note the maximum dilator pupil size, what is achieved with the mydriatics. And also look for the other ocular comorbidities like hardness of cataract, pseudoexfoliation, or any other thing. If any of this is positive, always be on the safer side of planning, anticipate and plan ahead of using iris hooks. Be prepared to use it. And this is a really small pupil of 2.5 millimeter in diameter, and this is a pupil of 4 millimeter where it is planned for a toric IOL. So in such cases, I will always plan iris hooks from the beginning of surgery and take all other precautions also, like slightly longer wound, low flow phaco, everything I'll just keep in mind. If the pupil is slightly larger, like 5 to 6 millimeter soft cataracts, I'll just keep the iris hook ready, but I won't hesitate to use it whenever it is required, keeping in all other things also. If it is a well dilated pupil, even with these precautions like placement of the wound, viscomydriasis, all those things will keep the eye well. These cases are unlikely to need iris hooks. So what is a critical diameter of the pupil to be considered small? It varies. There is no definitive guidelines that less than this is small pupil. So it depends upon surgeon's experience and how the eye behaves intraoperatively and the associated ocular comorbidities. Thank you for your patient listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Tamil Madam, for your wonderful video-based informative session on small pupil management. I think you have covered the whole gamut of small pupil management, as well as what causes iris prolapse and how to manage them. Now we'll take some questions or suggestions and comments from the surgeons also who have participated. So request all the surgeons to kindly unmute and go ahead with your questions or suggestions and comments please. There are 2 questions in the chat box also, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, so question is by Dr. Girish. Request Dr. Girish to kindly unmute and go ahead with the question, please.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, Girish.
So it was a nice presentation, nice videos, and it was really good. 2 things, like when you use the iris hooks, the fifth hook, do you use it below the incision?
No, my personal preference is I use 2 hooks on either side of my phaco incision. You can use it sub-incisionally also or adjacent to the clear corneal incision. If you're using 4 hooks, but I prefer to use 5, like in a rhomboid configuration as I show, on either side of my phaco incision. It is surgeon's preference.
How do you maintain the chamber stability, ma'am, in iris hooks?
No, you're just making a stab incision, and these does not leak. Unless you're going to enlarge it like for a side port, this is just a stab incision. So it doesn't leak.
Okay. Do you use any cycloplegics after iris manipulation, ma'am? Is there any
No,
role?
see, like putting the patient on a prolonged cycloplegics, if it is a short acting one, it is okay, but you're going to put the patient on a long acting cycloplegics, it will keep the pupil dilated in that state for prolonged period of time. So if at all you want to use some cycloplegics, you use a short acting one, but otherwise intensive topical steroids along with NSAIDs combination, if the NSAIDs is not contraindicated, itself will take care.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Girish, for your questions and suggestions. Request surgeons to kindly unmute and go ahead with the questions, please. Okay. In the meantime, ma'am, I in the videos in the discussion you have showed that you prefer to do stop and you were doing stop and chop as well as direct chop technique. So, in case of small pupils cases, what chop technique do you suggest, ma'am?
See, scientifically speaking, I'll just set the pupillary diameter as 5 millimeter for a beginner surgeon, because a 5 millimeter is the diameter where a rhexis can be done comfortably for a beginner surgeon. Because always we aim at a 5.5. So plus, if he is able to maintain the anterior chamber and able to do at and little bit beyond the pupillary margin, a safer rhexis is the first prerequisite. So once that is done, the next is the grade of cataract. If it is like a softer cataract like NS2 with a PSCC, even if you're going to limit the length of the trench to that pupillary diameter, if it is like 5 millimeter, if you're going to keep it at 5 millimeter, but of adequate depth, you can easily crack and do it. If the surgeon is comfortable doing only stop and chop or a divide and conquer, he can go ahead, but assuming that he has to visualize the phaco tip, that is the phaco probe and the second instrument always in the central safe zone. Horizontal chop is not advised because the second instrument has to go beyond the rhexis margin and hook the endonucleus and come towards the phaco probe, so that is not advised. But if you're able to do that, it doesn't mean that the surgeon has to master a direct chop just to start with a small pupil. Small pupil, by I'm meaning a 5 millimeter pupillary diameter which doesn't constrict. But if you have any doubt of the pupillary diameter, or if you have a fear that it might constrict, you can use your iris hooks from the beginning. So if you have used the iris hooks, the pupil size, and it is going to remain stable. So whatever technique the surgeon is comfortable with, they can go ahead.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Request surgeons to kindly unmute and go ahead with your questions, please.
Ma'am, is there any role of FLUR eye drops, ma'am? Flubiprofen?
See, topical NSAIDs can be given pre-operatively. That is helping, but in case of an IFS, in severe grade of IFS, it is not going to counteract that intraopmyosis or the floppiness of the iris. In normal cases, it does help. You can continue it. You need not stop it, but it doesn't give a major benefit, because in intraoperative floppy iris, the tone of the dilator smooth muscle is lost. So that has to be addressed. So you can continue. You need not stop it.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, madam. Sir, you can unmute, sir. Dr. Howell, you can unmute, sir. Yes, sir. Go ahead, sir.
Madam, as you have told, patients of benign prostate hypertrophy who are on medicines like Tamsulan or Flomax, any pre-medications before surgery, any specific drugs which you want to add?
In the pre-operative regimen, you're asking?
Yes, madam. Yes. I have come through some literature where they use some mixture of drugs which have intraop adrenaline, intraop atropine.
Yeah. See, that is like this epi sugarcane mixture and all those things
Yes,
are,
ma'am.
it's like intracameral cocktail preparations. So during surgery, the
Yes.
surgeon prepares and uses. If you're going to use such preparations, you have to be careful on your dosage, and you have to be careful that those medications doesn't contain a preservative. So that is really important. So if we are not taking care of this dosage and the preservative thing, it can cause damage to the corneal endothelium. So
Which cocktail you said, sir? Sugarcane?
no. In the literature, it has been
Just a
said that epi sugarcane, which is a mixture of BSS, lignocaine, all those things, epinephrine.
Okay. I'll go through it. Thank you.
Oh.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yeah. Good evening.
This is Dr. Ashmi. Actually, there was a patient I had who was dilating very well preoperatively, and however, on the day of surgery on table, she was almost just about 3.5 dilated pupil. So all her previous about 2 pre-op examinations, she had a full well dilated 6 pupil. But on the day of surgery on table, it was a very small pupil. So what could be the reason? Because I was not prepared for, a small pupil case, and then on table I had that. So in such cases, what could be the reason?
That's very unlikely unless the patient has been dilated the very previous day of surgery. And again, if you're going to repeat the drops the next day, the pupil can undergo fatigue. But a very well dilated pupil on all the previous visits and suddenly 3.5 is very unlikely. So
Yes, that's what. Even I was very surprised.
did it dilate with any
No, actually,
intracameral thing?
it did not dilate with any intracameral adrenaline.
Mm.
And actually, one thing which was notable in her case, I don't know if that is significant, but she was a part of the hospital staff, and she was an assistant in the hospital. And she, for some reason, had got hold of Tropicacil Plus. And when she was not able to see very well, she was because I realized that that drop was with her, and
Okay.
probably she was putting it for a long time or something. Maybe that could be the reason.
That's what sometimes,
So
if the patient is planning the very next day surgery and if you're going to dilate the previous day, sometimes the pupil undergo fatigue and it doesn't dilate well. But this is very unlikely because the previous day it has dilated well and
yeah.
3.5 on table. So what did you do?
Yeah, so I did iris hooks. I did iris hooks, but actually the iris hooks also in that case was very difficult. I don't know why I was getting stuck in putting the iris hooks also. So that's the next question I wanted to ask. That what was happening is while putting the iris hooks, it was the iris hooks would just bend at the corneal entry and would not go in. So what could be the reason? The plane of the incision would be one of the reasons, I think, but that was one unusual case where it was really a tough time putting iris hooks in for her.
That should not happen. See, if the iris hooks, it's like you're going to make the incision like side port incision, you make little clear corneal.
Yes.
The thing why we advise little bit of a posterior limbal incision, if you're going to make a more of clear corneal, when you insert an iris hook, it's going to tent up the iris anteriorly. So to avoid it, if you go a little bit posterior at a limbal incision, stab incision, if you're going to make it's going to keep your iris in the same plane. It's not going to bring it up. That's the only thing. And usually it should not, unless you're going to apply excessive pressure on the hooks, it should not bend and all. Or the place where you're using at the tip or in the middle of the iris hooks, the place where you hold it.
Yes. So actually it was not entering the incision only. So for some
Must
reason
be
it was just, yeah,
too
it
small.
was just coming up. No, I tried enlarging also, but it just kept on, not going in. Basically, there was no, in spite of having an entry point, the iris hooks was not able to enter. So that was a little strange thing that I encountered in that case.
Only at
So,
one site or all other site?
one I was able to put in, but all others it was very tricky. So I'm not sure. I think probably what I would later understand is probably the plane of the incision would not have been correct, and then maybe putting the iris hook in was not matching the plane. I'm not sure, but I have done previously iris hooks, not too many though, but I have done a few cases, and I didn't have that issue. But I was not sure what was going wrong here. So
The
one
plane of
thing only,
incision
the
just
plane.
at the limbus directed towards the
Yeah,
pupil, that's all.
that's it. And then
Ah.
the same way, you just put the iris hook.
The
Yeah,
learning
yeah.
curve is actually, it's not so steep as like others. It's like easy to use.
Yes, yes. So yeah, that was the thing.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rashmi. I think we can take this question a
Ma'am,
little often
what is
also, and then
the
we can understand a little more about this. Sir, go ahead, sir.
ma'am, what is
Yeah.
the stab incision? What instrument are you using for the stab incision to insert the iris hook? Are you using the MVR blade? Do you
Yeah,
advocate?
MVR blade. Whatever is available. In that case, which I showed, it was an MVR blade. Or any side port blade, what we use, like 15-degree blade also, it's okay, but you're not going to extend or enlarge it.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Sushil. We still have a few more minutes before we close on, so I request surgeons to kindly go ahead with your questions, please. In the meantime, ma'am, for the beginner surgeons who would be doing a divide and conquer technique, or the preoperatively the pupil is dilated, like Dr. Rashmi has said, so preoperatively the pupil is well dilated, and during the first trench or the second trenches, during the trenches time, sometimes what happens is during the iris tends to get caught and then it tends to shrink off. So at such situations, how do we manage that situations?
If the pupil is dilated well pre-op, and see, the causes of intraoperative meiosis is mostly like intraoperative floppy iris, and 25% the cause is not known actually. So as surgeons, beginner surgeons, try to avoid unnecessary manipulation using your side port, repetitively touching the iris, so that which can irritate the iris, and sometimes the pupillary size can come down. So that's the only thing. So that's it. If the pupil size comes down, you can use adrenaline in a diluted percentage, preservative free adrenaline. That can be tried as a first step, but it should be diluted, and it should be preservative free. But I don't advocate adrenaline nowadays because I've had one case of TAR. So if you're using, make sure that you're using a preservative free and diluted 1 in 3% dilution, and then use it. And even though then the pupil is constricting, it is better to rely on one of the pupil expansion device, and iris hooks is easier to use, so it's better to use it.
True. Okay. When it comes to this rigid pupil, I've got to know in the discussion that this pupil dilators might not work, or the even this iris hooks also might not work in this rigid pupil. So which devices would you suggest for such rigid
No,
pupils?
correct. Rigid pupil are those pupil which have a fibrosis at the sphincter pupillae. So those pupil are not elastic. Elastic, what I mean, the dilator muscle has lost its tone, so that is elastic. Here the problem is with the sphincter pupillae, which is fibrosed. So for us to insert a pupillary expansion ring like Malugin or a BX ring, at least it needs around 3.5 millimeter pupillar diameter to insert these rings comfortably. In a very small pupil and in shallow AC, the pupillary expansion rings is very difficult to insert. So in such cases, if you're planning only to use rings, it's better to stretch your pupil by stretch pupilloplasty, break those fibrosis. So by using Coughlin hook, when you do it, you cause a micro sphincter tears at the pupillary margin. So once the pupil comes down to relatively safer size of around 3.5 millimeter, then you can go ahead and using rings if you are wish to do. Otherwise, you can use iris hooks from the beginning only. But in such a small pupil, like around 2.5 millimeter, if you're using iris hooks, once you insert, do not stretch each hook to the fullest extent initially. So first engage all the hooks and then try to enlarge little by little consequently in all the hooks. So that way uncontrolled sphincter tears can be avoided.
Sure. Thank you, ma'am.
Hello.
Hello.
Ma'am, good evening.
Good evening.
Ma'am, I have a question for you. Ma'am, regarding the number of iris hooks for a beginner like me, is there any added advantage of using 5 hooks instead of 4, one at the corneal tunnel end? Is there any added advantage, or is it difficult when we add that extra 5 because it is at the tunnel? Any different location that we have to choose for placing that 5th hook?
See, even if you're using 4 hooks, the 4th hook is going to be placed either near the incision or subincisionally.
Okay.
Okay, then only you will be getting this diamond configuration.
Okay,
I prefer to use 5 hooks on either side of the incision. That's my technique. I'm comfortable with it. If you have using, because the iris hooks usually comes in a pack of 4 or 5, so you can use it 4 or 5 depending upon your preference. But the 4th hook always has to be used either subincisionally or adjacent to the corneal incision, so that the iris is not in the way of your phacoprobe.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alim, for the question. And we still have few more minutes, madam. So, any key takeaways that you want to suggest for the surgeons?
See, iris prolapse as a beginner surgeon, every one of us has faced it. And once it comes, if we are not going to manage it adequately, it is going to come again and again. So always never overinflate the eye with viscoelastic at whatever procedure you're doing, whatever step of surgery. So you should know the cutoff point. When you see the viscoelastic coming out of one of your side ports leaking, that means you're excessively filled. So always learn to stop overfilling your eye. And hydrodissection is one step which every one of us has to be taken care, where you burp out or let out the viscoelastic, create a fluid path to the saline to come out when you decompress the bag. So do a multi-quadrant gentle hydrodissection. After each hydrodissection, decompress the bag. That is really important. And when you have iris prolapse, always decompress the globe. It's always it's due to excessive viscoelastic. So decompress through the side port, let out the viscoelastic. Once the pressure between the in front and behind the iris is equalized, then if you repose it, the iris will stay there. If you're not decompressing, even how many ever times, even through side port, if you're trying to repose it, it won't repose it. So once it is let out, use a cyclodialysis spatula preferably from your side port and gently reposit the iris. Another thing, when you're taking your phaco probe or during IOL implantation also, there is a chance that iris will suddenly pop out. So at that time, either you can use a little bit of viscoelastic just below, over the subincisional iris, so that little bit, not overfilling it. Otherwise, you can take your cyclodialysis spatula, keep it over the iris, and then take your phaco probe. And when coming out and in of the eye, in such cases where you are having a multiple repeated iris prolapse, just before entering and coming out, step to 0, so that the iris doesn't prolapse again. That's all.
True, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. And any more questions, surgeons, before we close on? Or suggestions or comments? It's almost 6 o'clock, so 1 hour past, not 1 hour is done. So request surgeons to.
Thank you, madam.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, madam. With this, we come to end of today's web show series, and it's been a delight to hear from you, madam. Thank you so much for taking time to enlighten us, and thank you so much for all the surgeons for your active participation with questions and suggestions to make this program a successful one. I hope you all have got your takeaway points from this session. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, Karthik. Thank you all.
Thank you, madam. Thank you so much.
Thank you.